Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, a podcast where we explore the magic of storytelling and designing games. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today I'm delighted to have Whitney Beltrán with us. Whitney is a tabletop role-playing game designer, a narrative designer, a writer, and a general gaming industry professional who is known for her work in games that deeply explore identity, narrative themes, and player psychology. She's especially well known for her insights and knowledge in the world of mythology. We'll explore how mythic storytelling in video games can lead to personal growth, identity exploration, and emotional resonance with players. So let's get into it. Whitney, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, happy to connect with you and be here to talk about my favorite subjects, Gerald.
Your favorite subjects, and we have a lot of shared favorite subjects, I do believe, including today we're going to talk about mythology in games and how mythic tales impact character or player interactions and player experiences. But you have a storied background. You've written some tabletop role-playing games.
Yes.
You've done all sorts of things, Bluebeard's Bride. I would love to hear your origin story, your journey. How did you fall in love with writing, gaming, design, all of it, and what got you to where you are today?
Yeah, so as a player, I played Dungeons and Dragons in high school, like most folks. And then in university, I discovered LARPing. And that was like D&D on crack. I was like, this is even better. This is even more experiential. This is even more embodied. And I ran a LARP group for a while. But when I was younger, I thought I was going to be a lawyer for the EPA. I was pre-law with a degree in environmental policy, and I ended up serving in the Peace Corps in Ecuador, and then actually turned things around in a really dramatic way. I had some realizations about what I wanted my life's works to be while I was in Ecuador, and I realized that was not it. But what I came back with was a really deep and renewed interest in mythology as a living creature. Not just we read about the Greek gods and the Norse gods and Wolfensch's fables, right? But a mythology in the world operating today. I found it really fascinating. And so I was like, I know what to do. I'll go to grad school. So I did. I went to Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara. It's one of the only mission-specific universities, or I guess graduate schools, that focuses on mythological studies. But Pacifica is unique in that it links mythology with psychology, particularly Carl Jung and depth psychology. It's a really fruitful combination of ways of thinking and paradigms. And I was like, this is great. I thought I was, again, going to be an academic at that point. But I had another realization, which is like games and myth and imaginal play are doing something really, really interesting and unique and powerful. And I think now that I have this blueprint of how myths work psychologically and why, I can go out and make really good games commercially. And so I did. I wrote for a number of tabletop role-playing games, including Dungeons and Dragons, Van Richten Guides to Ravenloft. As you mentioned, my own game, Bluebeard's Bride, which is a feminine horror tale. And I loved it. I love designing games and making games, but also the salaries in TTRPGs are not good. And so I was like, where do I go? What do I do that's sustainable? And that's how I ended up as a video game developer. So I'm a narrative designer and writer for video games now full time. And I've been doing that for a while now, some years. I'm not going to give away my age, but I'm very happy doing that work. So quite an evolution of like heel turn to the right spot.
Nice. Well, not to gush too much, but you're basically the person I've been looking for since I started this podcast.
Amazing. Thank you.
That concept of the psychological effects of narrative inside of game spaces and myths inside of game spaces and how the two can combine to shape society and craft the next generations of humanity. That's why I started this. That's the question I'm digging into over and over again in different ways. So
one of us.
So
yes, join the club. It's a very small club of very strange people, but we do good work.
We ask a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's dig into that then with a question. Myth-inspired narratives often tap into that universal themes of heroism, transformation, self-discovery. But why do you think that myths, whether ancient old ones or modern ones that are happening and being birthed now, why do they have such a powerful effect on players?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we'll all have different answers, but mine is pretty straightforward. Myths are stories we tell ourselves about ourselves in order to understand who we are. They are identity making in their structure, right? And they are archetypal in their structure, meaning they engage with personality patterns that are sort of like embedded in the human psyche and that we all recognize. An archetype is really like a very compressed zip file of what a person is like, right? And we're able to pass those files around really efficiently. And when we invoke archetypal patterns or archetypal characters, archetypal narrative movements, we all kind of get it. There are different variations and flavors across cultures and places, but as humanity, we're actually pretty united psychologically around understanding what archetypes are, which makes archetypal psychology, again, Jungian psychology, that the education that I got, really, really relevant to narrative and game making. So that's kind of the basics of like, what is this? It is the components of our understanding of ourselves.
Just to jump on a sidetrack for 5 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
you start talking about archetypes to any writer, but especially to game designers and game writers, there's always that conversation of, yes, archetypes are excellent shorthand and a good way to connect instantly with a player, but they're also, if you use them too much, it becomes, cut and dry, it becomes repetitive, it becomes expected. Where do you find the balance between those two?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, when I was in graduate school, I had a scholarship. I was actually a Joseph Campbell Scholar, right? That was the name of my scholarship. I had access to his Opus archives on campus. Of course, I've read The Power of Myth and The Hero of the Thousand Faces, but I am very anti-Campbellian in the way that I approach making games. And that is because there's a history here. So there is this guy named Vogler who operated in Hollywood, and he basically took Campbell's academic work, made it into like a 9-page addendum of like, here's the formula for making heroes' journey stories, and we'll make all the money. And that was terrible for all of us. We are still reeling from what Vogler did decades later because Hollywood executives don't like risk and they want a sure bet. And if someone tells them this is the formula to get a hit for a really great story, they're going to be like, let's do that. Let's do the hero's journey. Okay, there's 5 parts, and then you have to go through this part, and then you've got to return, and then you meet the wizard, and like, okay, let's do those things. It's actually really restrictive, and it is not good for authentic storytelling. What Kember's scholarship was important for its time, but as academics, we've actually moved on quite beyond Campbell, and like pop culture kind of got stuck for some reason, right? We've made improvements, people. And the thing about Campbellian storytelling and working with the quote monomyth is, first of all, the monomyth is not real, right? The monomyth is actually a tale of masculine progression through life. It's pretty feminine exclusionary. It's pretty exclusionary of like other ways of being. And it is heavily Western influenced to the way that Campbell thought about it, right? He connected a lot of dots, sometimes presumptuously, right? And to form this monomyth theory, but there are holes in, and we have poked fingers into those holes, right? And so what really happens is if you want to get proficient at this type of storytelling, you've got to go a layer down, which is to understand like the individual components of what makes up an archetypal psychology. So when you look at a person's mind, like an individual person or a group mind even, there are different parts, right, of you. There's like the protector part, there's the child part, there's the masculine or the feminine part or whatever in between. And they all have relationships to each other, right? That are like at the sub personality level. One of my favorite things when I'm designing characters for games is to break them down into these parts. And the way that I usually do it, come to my Clarion class so I can teach you, is, there's always a complex, which means like, what's your damage? Like, what hurt you? And then related to that is your drive, meaning how are you addressing your complex? How are you addressing your trauma? And drive is usually how we figure out if you're a hero, quote, or a villain. It's how you address your trauma. Like, are you doing it in a way that's forgiving and, beautiful and deep? Or are you like shoving it away and punishing other people, right? So often your relationship to your complex is what makes you a really cool villainous character. And then there's shine, which is like what makes that character attractive to audiences, not necessarily good, but like magnetic, right? We all want to deal with magnetic characters. And so you can mix and match those parts with some intuition about what people are really like. Like you need high EQ. And then you can make fresh, interesting characters that act really dynamically, that you understand as a designer what they're going to do in a certain situation, but are still familiar enough that they give players kind of what I call predictive dopamine hit, where you just guess a moment before a character is going to do something, that they're going to do something, and they're like, yeah, I get it, right? And you feel really good. That's kind of the axis that we want to follow, at least in video games, right? Not necessarily in TTRPGs because it's a different design paradigm, where it feels really rewarding and fresh, but we are operating with a known universe of components, right? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
And I wanted this season I'm trying to keep my episodes shorter so that they're a little more digestible, but I want to talk to you for hours. There's like 14 different things came out of my brain there that I want to like, oh, okay. First of all, I'm 50 years old and I have no problem telling my age. And I only have a couple things left on my bucket list that I really want to do, big things. I've been very lucky and very fortunate to do most of them, but Clarion is on that list still. That's one of the things still on there. But let's talk. Okay. When you're talking about those archetypes that Hollywood picked up on, thanks to Campbell, where they became so embedded in the craft of telling stories, creating novels, comics, movies. And let's say what it is. There's a lot there that can does damage when they're still used.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm curious, are there modern myths, and this is completely off topic, are there modern myths that are being crafted today that are coming out of society today that could do similar damage?
That could do similar damage.
Are those are they a thing of the past and an ancient history, or are there still people creating modern versions of myths that are similarly damaging?
So about to get political, be prepared, people. So do we have some modern myths that are actually critically damaging to us right now, in my opinion? One is the myth of the self-made billionaire. There's no such thing, right? There literally isn't. And it's a myth that we cling to because we think we could be great, right? We are dealing with scarcity a lot in our economy right now. We're dealing with feeling squeezed in a variety of different ways for our time with the air pollution, like our environment is it feels emotionally like it's coming down on us. And so we have this aspirational path where if I'm smart enough, if I work hard enough, if I shuck and jive enough, if I am elite enough, then the world will see me and I will be rewarded and I can have all the power that I want. It's basically like a core power fantasy, right? We see a lot of power fantasies on different types of games.
Yep.
But it's obviously really destructive because it's non-sustainable. Like realistically, like we just cannot support this globally for a long time. And it keeps us distracted from solving our problems, which is getting a better handle on stewardship of our environment, like staying integrated with nature and not feeling like we're separate or not a part of it when we affect it and it affects us very deeply, right? And just the amount of life quality and inequality that we have just amongst humans, right, is growing. It's not decreasing. And for anyone like me who's justice oriented, who believes in the good of people, that hurts. And I would love to see our myths shift in who we think of as heroes in a really big way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we're going to go back to the core subject of this podcast, but
Okay.
I want you to come, I'm putting it out right now. I want you to come back sometime and let's talk about how we can use myths inside of game spaces to help move society in that direction. Because I think that's important, but that's not what we're here to talk about today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I already stealth do that and just don't talk about it.
Love it.
But I have thoughts.
I thought you might. Okay, well, let's go back to talking about mythic narrative in video games and how it impacts players. What would you say is the reason that a mythic narrative inside of a game space has such strong emotional resonance?
Because we connect to it. I mean, at a really basic level, we feel like that's like us, or it understands us, or it sees us. Humans need to be seen by each other, right? And the thing that makes game narrative unique from narratives in movies or novels or other passive media is the interactive element, right? You are engaged cognitively in a really different way with games and sometimes with your body with games than you are with passive media. And so it becomes a conversation. You like the designer is speaking to the player and the player is speaking to the designer. And the player really, really wants to be seen and acknowledged and feel like they are an active participant in that conversation, right? That's player autonomy at a really basic level. And so when player autonomy is rewarded, right, then everybody feels good. And so we are very, very, very social creatures. Like on this planet, different species have different levels of sociality. Ours is really high. And so stories are also a way for us to put each other on the map. Like, where are you? How are you connected to me? Where am I? How am I connected to you? And so we have to honor that interconnectivity when we design because it's a really important part of what motivates us as humans.
When you're creating those narrative myths, those mythic narratives inside of video games, how can you use that structure as a narrative designer or a game writer to allow for personal growth, a growth of not just the character or the avatar in the game, but also of the player himself, theirself?
Absolutely. I think about this a lot. One of my favorite things to do when I have the ability and the means is to design for catharsis. So catharsis is like a movement through, right? A thing. It's an alchemical moment where you change or you experience a change or a release, a really big release. And I think as Westerners specifically, we're not really good with dealing with emotions, right? Culturally, we're really afraid of death. We don't know how to move through death. Culturally, we're really afraid of the other, the outsider, and we're not good with negotiating those boundaries, right? And so when I design for catharsis, what I'm really designing for is like an emotional journey, right? Where, you're going up the roller coaster and then you're going down the roller coaster and then you're going up again. Smart designers can titrate that experience pretty expertly to deliver it to the player and still honors the player's agency and make the player feel like they are choosing these things. It's actually a grand illusion, right? We are setting you up to play how we want you to play, but we need you to feel like it is your choice. And in some ways, it really is, like you picked up the game. And so when designing for catharsis, you got to put stakes in the ground. And the stakes cannot be external to the player. They have to be internal. So you have to reach inside of them and get them to engage. And there are ways to do that, right? In my analog game, TTRPG Bluebeard's Bride, we bring those stakes to life by asking the players relational questions at the beginning of the game. So they have ties to other characters. And we sneak in some stuff that makes it a little bit more about the player, right, than the character, so that when their character faces this extreme horror in Bluebeard's mansion, part of the player is facing that too. That's one of our best mechanics in the game. It's this mechanic called Shiver from Fear. And if you're not familiar with it, Shiver from Fear is when the GM notices a player reacting to the horror in the game and says, what is making you scared right now? And how is it worse than you thought? Right. And what that is doing is it's not saying, boo, as a GM, you're afraid of spiders and the spiders are getting you, because the player's not going to care. Right. They're like, oh, OK, spiders. But if you invite them in, you invite them to fill a space and they do it willingly by telling you, well, I am afraid of this right now and it's worse in this way. then they're committed to the fear. You've set the trap and they walked right in, and everybody's agreed to it, right? Consensually. And that gave us the ability to really work towards deep emotional stakes. So in that moment of failing to free yourself from Bluebeard's grasp eventually happens, you feel it. It's really powerful. And we were really proud of being able to make that happen in that game because it took a fair bit of like really concise artistry and design.
Wow. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I wonder what that kind of mechanic would do in a LARP space with reaction.
You would have to operate it very carefully. There would be a lot of bleed.
Yeah, I was going to say bleed.
And people would need to be kind of like, we would have to pre-evaluate, I think, to make sure everyone could handle that experience.
Yeah. Powerful. Wow. Which is a good reminder that there are powerful energies at work behind game mechanics, and there are moments inside of the sacred circle or the magic circle that you can cause issues if you're not careful. All right.
It's a tool, and tools can do work, and they can also accidentally cause damage. So
that is an excellent analogy. So when you're talking about designing the path of a story, designing the game, how do you pull apart the narrative part and the game design part? Do you take into consideration for those moments when you're trying to create those moments? Is there actual gameplay elements that you take into consideration, or do you come more from the narrative, or how do you tie the two together?
I mean, I'm a narrative designer, so my job is to put them together, not pull them apart. So I am of the personal philosophy that game mechanics, game verbs, the things that you do, all have meaning assigned to them, right? There's a context in which this verb happens. You are saying something when you do that verb. As simple as like, I'm in a game where you shoot a bow and arrow at other characters to fight them. Cool. We've just said a bunch of things about this world and what it means to interact in it, and our verbs, right, are aggressive and we're attacking. And so now we have to also defend. Okay. So we're in a contested, like it goes from the very, very basics. And one of the cool things about narrative design is you're kind of always chasing the dragon. Like you're never quite going to get there, but you're looking for resonance and synchronicity between game verbs and story. And sometimes it's as simple as like one of the, party characters in a video game is just really reckless with their lives because they've had a lot of trauma and they don't care if they're hurt. They're kind of just running and bashing into things. So their combat kit is like very destructive, and like maybe they give openings. They can hit really hard with their shield bash, but then they're disarmed and then the other character can hit them. So it's emblematic of like their deeper psychology. I love that stuff, right? But it's interdisciplinary work. You don't get to do all of these things by yourself. So you need to communicate, you need to understand what the other designers want, what the goals and the pillars of the game are, and work together in kind of like what I would call a happy marriage between disciplines to get there, right? Solo designing is great if you can solo design everything, but at least in video games, that's pretty much just not going to happen. So when we talk about things, it's always in context that you're working with a bunch of other people.
That makes sense. And that sounds like something that incoming narrative designers and younger game writers need to keep in mind, is how all that comes together. That's an excellent bit of advice. Let's go at it from a writer point of view for a second here, and world creation, world building, lore, creating original myths. What would you say are the keys to making powerful original myths?
The keys to making powerful original myths. So one approach that I always take is kind of a general philosophy of animism, which is the world is a character. What does the world want? What does the world hunger for? What is it afraid of? What are its wounds, right? And the environment being an active participant in whatever is happening. If we look at a lot of, quote, ancient myths, it was a very embodied world, right? And if we want to evoke that kind of stuff, that's a really easy place to start. The other thing is to consider like the entire game world as on two levels: individual organisms, right? Or characters, and then as a single like super organism. So one of the things that I love to do in games where there's like a party and you get to preset who is in the party, is designing the party specifically so that each character kind of represents like an important aspect of human psychology or humanity, like a slice. So that when they add up together, they kind of create a combined psychology of a rich, really complex single person. So it's kind of like echoes or like radial fractals where like sure in a single human psychology, which we talked about earlier, it has all these parts, right? The complex and the drive and the shine. And then at a greater level, individual characters are combined to create that rainbow of human experience well and concisely too. So you want to like think about like who you're putting in the game and why and what are they representing and how can you leverage them to create a really like rich portrait, right? And when you have that set up, then it becomes really easy to put those characters in situations that are mythological, right? Or heroic or tragic and being like, I already know how they work. So I do know how they're going to react and kind of almost letting it play itself out. It's kind of like they're little engines and you put them on the track and you're going to see where they go.
So when you inject player characters into a game world that has a myth that's happening, like in video games and in tabletop role-playing games, quite often we take part in the creation of new myths. How do you account for that? Are there keys to making sure that the player can integrate and has agency in a way that still honors what that myth is going to become?
Oh, it's really important, right? It's super, super important to get that right. I always think about designing games as like creating a box and inviting other people to come into that box, right? I am not serving up a narrative and being like, here you go. This is my artistry. This is what I'm telling you. If I wanted to do that, I'd write novels, right? Games are an invitation. They're a seduction, really, at the end of the day, and they're an illusion. So we're magicians. And when we think about player agency in kind of a mythic game, we really want to think about how did they change the world, right? The world starts in one state. The player is going to do something or a number of things that change the world. And that goes back to like the world seeing you. It's like the ultimate, the world sees you when the whole axis of existence shifts because of what you've done, right? Or who you are. That's like the chosen one myth. And that, you know, some people like it, some people don't. Sometimes you like it. Sometimes you're like, I'm tired of chosen one stories. But they exist for a reason. And it's because we gravitate towards them. I worked on chosen one myth making games and I'm working on non-chosen one myth making games. And you just approach them a little differently, right? But they both work.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's bring it all together. If you were to take everything you've learned, take what we've talked about, and you were to like offer up to a new narrative designer, a new game writer in general, a new tabletop role-playing game designer even, what is the most important thing they need to keep in mind when working with myths?
Myths are not tropes. There is not a formula. The best way to get good at this is to engage with other art. That's paintings, that's TV, that's foreign soap operas. It's, ancient. It's the list of ships in Herodotus. It's, stuff from other places and other cultures. Honestly, the answer is just to be a whole person. Go be a whole ass person. Go have a life. Travel, go outside the United States if you can, if you have access to that, and live. And then you'll understand people a lot better, because that's what we're doing at the end of the day is we are telling stories about people, we're interacting with people. And mythic stories are they're us writ large, right? They're us amplified. And so if you want to tell a good mythic story, you got to love people, you got to love humanity, and you got to embrace us.
I love that. That's some fantastic advice. That brings us to the end of the core topic, but I do have a fun question for everybody who comes on the show. It's just what I do. It's the question that lives at the heart of this social experiment I call podcast. So I'm going to throw it at you and we'll see what you do with it. In my opinion, there is this magical space at the intersection of obviously story and game, but also comic book writing, improv acting, music, all kinds of things where we can all just get together and hang out. There's a shared fellowship, the shared language. if you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what is the magical thread that holds that space together?
I mean, I've done a lot of research on this, Gerald. So if anyone's interested, Victor Turner writes some amazing books about sacred space and play. What we're really talking about, in my opinion, is liminal space, right? And that is an altered space that people agree to go into together to do these mystical, sometimes magical, sometimes just playful things. But what liminal space is, it's a space in which we agree that the rules in our social interactions have changed, right? We have different rules for this space, and we get to do different things that we're not allowed to do in normal, everyday, mundane world, right? And so that's what we mean by a sacred or a liminal or, a play space, is we've rewritten the rules. And with these new rules, we can engage with each other in different ways that we don't have access to most of the time.
I don't know if I have to ask that question anymore. Finally got the answer. I remember the first time I read the concept of magic. I think it was Sacred Circle then, but Magic Circle, whatever. And I went, oh yeah, that's it. That's so cool. I'm going to still ask because people have cool answers that are often very philosophical in nature, but that is the answer. It's brilliant. I love it. And that's why we do what we do.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm going to start heading for the door here, but I do like to open up a little space. Do you have anything you're working on, you want to promote, anything you've done in the past, like Bluebeard's Bride, that you want people to have a look at? Or conversely, where can we find you online?
Excellent question. So I am on Blue Sky as a Bright Whitney. And I am heading to GDC soon, which is the Game Developers Conference. Most of what I'm working on right now is under NDA because that's how video games work. Yep. But I have actually recently started writing short fiction because I was tired of games getting canceled and then all of my work getting taken away. So, I'm looking to publish in fiction magazines in the intermediate future. So hopefully you'll see some of that from me soon. But yeah, I'm on Blue Sky. I have my own website, which is also brightwhitney.com. I have a thing going. You notice the branding, very strong. But yeah, I am around the video game and TTRPG spaces doing stuff like this all the time, and I really enjoy it.
Wonderful. Just out of curiosity, will you someday grace us again with a little bit more tabletop design work, or is that something that's in the past now?
It's a question that I'm working on answering right now, actually.
Cool. Right on.
So we shall see. That's what I can say about it right now.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that is it, my friend. I'm going to push you out the door into the Canadian cold. But before you go, can you give us any parting words of wisdom? I want to give you the last word.
Oh, man, you're really going to make me do it. I think the most powerful tool we have as people is self-knowledge. So, know thyself. Those are the words I will leave you with.
Well, that's a wrap for another episode of The Corner of Story and Game. I want to say thank you to Whitney for sitting down and sharing such incredible insights into the power of myth-inspired narratives and their impact on our players. I hope you, like me, walk away with a new understanding of how mythic storytelling can shape our experiences, our identities, and our emotional journeys in games. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow the podcast on your platform of choice, leave a comment or a review, and hey, come chat with us over on Discord. Until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.